Hi, everyone. I'm here with Andreas Karakas, is CEO of Innovation Networks. He's joining us. Thank you for joining me today, Andreas. Really appreciate it. Right now, we're in the middle of a project of shopping for a CRM. Well, it is one of the functions that Innovation Networks does with their clients. But I'm going to ask Andreas, and maybe you could introduce yourself and a little bit about Innovation Networks.
Yes, hi. Thanks, Jonathan. So Andreas Karakas from Innovation Networks. We're a managed service provider. So what does that mean? So that means that we're basically a management company for technology, essentially. So we take the day-to-day, the projects, the consulting, all that kind of stuff, and we wrap it into a service of sort. So we try to be kind of the trusted advisors for our clients. And, you know, we've been doing that for 25 years. I've been doing this for coming up on 29 years now, for a little too long. So, you know, every year in technologies, they call it it's like a dog year in any other business. So it's quite a long time. Yeah, so this is like you alluded to, this is one of the functions that we see a lot. A lot of our customers just, you know, they run into the need to acquire or to find a CRM, or to solve the problems that you know, that getting a CRM would solve.
Awesome. How do those engagements get started?
Typically there's a champion internally. Typically there's or there's a new requirement that arises, right? They're trying to get data. There's a loss of data. There's a lack of data. Sometimes you'll there's a new opportunity to gather data that they realize that they might need. And or they're trying to mature their sales process. So the CRM is the customer relations management, right? So anything that goes into the relationship with the customer is associated with the CRM. So whatever process would drive that is typically the catalyst that starts this conversation. Is now we need to go ahead and purchase this or do this or implement something like this.
Right. So when you've started the process, you've started a customer engagement. Maybe you can talk me through how you go through that engagement process to get to understand what their needs are and what they're looking for.
Yeah. So typically we start all of our engagements with a needs analysis or a SWOT analysis around, well, the needs analysis involves a SWOT analysis, but we start to basically look at the needs. And we typically start with functional needs. So, you know, what are the functions that they need to achieve with this software? So, and quite honestly, it's very similar for all other softwares as well, whether we're doing CRM, whether we're doing ERP, whether we're doing, you know, business operating software, anything of those sorts. We always want to start with the functions. What is the main function that we need to have happen here? Does it need to integrate with your accounting system? Does it need to track this information? Does it need to record telephone calls? Does it need to blah, 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 blah? So start to look at the functions, and then we start to prioritize those functions into 3 helpful lists, and we call those essentially, it's our you know, what are the needs, what are the wants, and what are the nice to haves. And when you force the client to start to evaluate that list of functions and requirements, and you force them to say, well, it'd be nice to get them all, but chances are you're not going to get all of them. And so we need to prioritize. And sometimes getting all of them means a price tag you can't afford. So everybody has champagne taste on a beer salary, but unfortunately we have a beer salary sometimes. So we need to maybe pour some beer into a wine glass. this is some things that we need to do in business. So so typically we would go through that process with them, start to narrow down those functions and those needs, and force them to prioritize it. Another thing, Jonathan, that we typically run into is, even though people within an organization might want to get everything tomorrow, and they might even have the funds to do it, they don't always have the capacity to absorb it, right? So because even if you were to put the latest technology and the latest cybersecurity and the latest wireless and the latest this, the process of absorbing it takes time, and you need to prioritize, what is the key feature that you need? The key feature is to capture the data. Okay, well then we're not going to take the time to implement the soft keys on the keyboard or the other little function that isn't as high of a priority first, because you can't do it all together. If you do, it's like I always say, if you do it all together, it's like getting hit with a circular saw. You don't know which tooth hit you first, right? And usually it is somewhat of a bloodbath. So you have to lay these things out in phases. So by doing that exercise up front, it allows us to prioritize the objectives, the functions, and then roll out the phases.
Awesome. So after a period of time, once you've gathered an understanding of what your customer needs, the next step, of course, is going to be looking for the product that's going to be a best fit for them. How do you go through an evaluation of the products available? And there are a lot of CRM products out there.
Unfortunately, a lot of it has become experience now. So we kind of know, who does the best marketing, and who who can talk a good game and who actually delivers. So there's a little bit of expertise that goes into that based on experience. So typically we stick to the features, right? We try to stay agnostic when it comes to what solution we're implementing, if it's the right solution for the company. We can usually, because there are so many products, we can usually narrow it down to 2 at minimum. Most of the time it's 3 to 4 products that we can shortlist. Then once we've shortlisted to those 3 products, then we'll go through a demo of each of those products. How would they work? What type of functionality? And then typically we let the product expert do a presentation on the specific solution for that client, and see how well we hit the mark on those things, how well it would roll out on our phased approach, what the licensing costs would be, and all the basic things. And then we let the customer grade them and make their selection.
And the grading process is comparing the functionality against the features that are available?
Yeah, functionality, features, and then obviously they're going to add in look and feel, trust. They're going to add in licensing costs, longevity. If it's an up and coming, software company, there's a risk, right? It might be cheaper. They might have a really cool process. They might be groundbreaking, or a disruptor in the market. But you're taking a risk compared to a tried, tested, and true product that's been on the market for 12, 15 years.
How many times in those, when viewing these different applications, do you find that customization becomes a very large part of the product?
It's a massive part of the project. And when you're looking at applications like Zoho, or what's that other one there? It's the stupid popular one there.
Zoho, I'm definitely familiar with.
Yeah, everybody's free software there. It starts off free. Oh gosh, I had a sales guy that pitched it to us to try it for a little bit. Anyway, it starts off free, and they tell you that they include a bunch of customization and or customize HubSpot. There we go.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, HubSpot. Very sexy, very cool looking. And then they tell you, we include the customization for some ridiculous price, and they'll do, 600 hours of customization for $1,100 or something ridiculous. We have my grandfather used to have a saying: wherever you hear about a lot of cherries, bring a small basket. They don't deliver, and it's a very difficult. If it sounds too good to be true, chances are it is. So that's been our experience. Unfortunately, for the most part, they don't deliver. So customization is a huge piece. A lot of those cheaper, more cost-effective CRMs are that way for a reason. They're not going to charge $50 a seat. They might have entry levels of $23 a seat, but you have much fewer things that you can do with it. Now, on the other hand, some of the more expensive ones like Salesforce, and that you can do a lot of customization, and you can customize it to do absolutely anything you want, or Microsoft Dynamics, but you don't.
Oh, you've just gone mute.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. That's okay.
No, it was another call coming in.
That's
Sorry,
okay.
I apologize. So unfortunately, those incoming calls didn't interrupt the Zoom calls. But yeah, unfortunately, when you pick some of those larger, more customizable platforms, they are customizable to a very large extent, but it's extremely expensive because you're paying $195, $175 an hour for a custom resource. It has a whole bunch of discovery. It has a whole bunch of implementation and process. That none of them are easy to customize.
Right.
So customization is a huge. It can be a larger part of the project than the implementation.
Awesome. Another thing that you mentioned the other day, which I thought was really interesting, was data sovereignty and being part of the conversation. What considerations do your clients have to make in that area?
Well, sometimes it will be an issue with they have to integrate into a database that's on premise. So they might have an existing server or database that's on premise. So they want a solution that is also on premise. That happens a lot in the enterprise space. It's happening less and less now, but it sometimes is a prerequisite when they're doing this. So they have another database that we're going to be pulling information from, or communicating with. There are ways to do that through the cloud, but they will come to us with a predetermined notion that they want that server on premise. A lot of customers will also like to do the on-premise function because they say, well, if I stop paying for licensing, if I stop working with this product, I still retain a copy of a functioning software that I can access at any time for archival purposes. So that is, one of the, mindsets that we come into, discovery with, and, sometimes that dissipates, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it gets firmer. Everybody also has to understand, data sovereignty means where does that data sit and who owns it? So sometimes that would be for certain companies, they're not allowed to have data outside of Canada. And sometimes they're not allowed to have data on shared infrastructure. And that sometimes comes down to regulatory bodies that they're governed by. So accountants, healthcare, there are certain things, so also the pharmaceuticals, but sometimes there are internal or partner imposed privacy and data sovereignty rules. So just working with, insurance software, they might tell you that, hey, just because you do have access to our client data, that data needs to remain here. So it doesn't always have to mean that you are under some type of regulatory compliance, but sometimes your customers might be. And, you know, under Canadian privacy law, you're still liable. So you need to be, right. Just because you picked a third party like AWS or Salesforce or somebody else to host your data, even though they're hosting it, you're still liable because you're the one who chose them. So people have to be aware of that. One of the other things we do get is just some people are just nationalistic that way. They just have that national pride, and they're like, no, I need my data to stay in Canada, and I don't want those damn NSA looking at it. So they will come with that notion, and sometimes that gives you, you know, a commencement point. And then, you know, you present the alternative, and sometimes the alternative is chosen, sometimes it's not. But cloud is the problem with that, because really being in the cloud and saying, I want my data, you know, just here is fine if you're in a private hosted cloud. But when you're on the public cloud, that's like standing in a swimming pool and say, you know, this here's my water. It's a very difficult thing to do. So yes.
Oh, thank you. And then of course, once your client has chosen a system, the next step is going to be deploying. There's a couple of things in here, and like, what do you look at with a deployment process? And of course, what people do you engage internally for a deployment process? And then how much do you participate in the implementation at a client?
Okay. So for a deployment process, it all depends. Jonathan, it depends on the solution that they end up selecting, and you know, what software we're using. As far as internal staff, typically it's a champion from each department. So we would typically pick, so if you were in accounting, let's say, and you had a list of wants and needs that we were implementing, you would be the champion for those functions. So you would be expected to help direct, test, and help train on those functions. So typically it's the people that have the requirements that tend to be the champions within each department. So you'd have one from sales, you'd have one from accounting, you'd have one from operations. Sometimes you might have other departments depending on the customer. But typically you'd have those three key areas. Sometimes you would have a functioning department like a sales department, and then you might even have like a separate purchasing or a separate quotation department, and they might have a completely different process that goes into a CRM. Sometimes you'll have an inventory issue, so you might be dealing with a production manager or a floor manager or something like that. So all those individual people would have to champion their individual pieces of the CRM development and implementation, and make sure that they signed off on the functionality. And then you'd have your overall champions. So those people would all be involved to different extents, and all tagged in each phase of those rollouts and developments, right? So as you're rolling them out, depending on if you're doing a financial component, that would be done first, then, you know, blah, 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 then the rest would be based on priority. So all those people will be engaged at the specific milestones as required. As far as our involvement in the process, again, depends on if we're doing a full rollout of Microsoft CRM or another CRM that we might provide the full service with, then we would be the experts. So we would do our own project management and our own deployment and our own training and so on and so forth. If we're working with a third party, so maybe like, let's say they did choose Zoho or they chose HubSpot or whatever, we would then manage the project for the client typically. I'd say very few times we haven't, but typically what we would do is we would be the project manager and drive those milestones and those meetings and the deployment of that project for them. So again, we're agnostic. Even though we're not doing it, we'll still drive. We know what a proper deployment looks like. So we'll make sure that we can shine the flashlight on any smoke and mirrors, and get them through the project in a timely manner, keep them to their milestones, keep them to their budgets, keep them to their goals, and also manage any kind of change requests or anything like that.
And that brings up a good point. One of the problems on the projects of this scope or size can be scope creep. With these type of engagements, how do you manage that?
Scope creep, Jonathan, is a huge issue, and that is really defined and I think subsided mostly by having a very clear SOW, a statement of work. What are we responsible for? What are you signing off up front? What are we doing? What are the priorities? What is the functional things that we're doing? What are you engaging me to do? I want you to have a CRM that does this, 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 this. It's going to have inventory. It's going to have a key component. It's going to have quoting. It's going to have sales flow approval. It's going to have this. It's going to have that. It's going to have customer fields, a customer field for all of this information. Now, if you come to me and you say, now I want to add a customer field and capture all previous purchases from the customer, and I want that displayed in this, that's out of scope. That's not what we originally agreed to. Now, it might be great, and you might have realized it along the way, and it was a huge eureka moment for you, and I'm very proud of you, but there's an extra cost to it. So now we need to say, okay, great. We can either do it lockstep and say, yes, we're going ahead, but here's a change request and sign off and approve the extra 5 hours, 6 hours it's going to take to do it.
Awesome. Andreas, thank you so much. I think my students are going to really appreciate this a lot. They're going through this entire exercise right now. I think that seeing it from your perspective, especially this is what they're trying to be, is those consultants advising and creating a statement of work. So again, thank you very much. I look forward to having you in class at one point.
Anytime you need, anything you need, and any other questions, you can ask through Jonathan, and I'll be happy to answer.